This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Emily, host of Beauties and Headcanons here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come and check out my show, Beauties and Headcanons, where we talk about nerdy theories, games, TV shows, books, movies, you name it. We're here to talk nerdy to you. A new show comes out every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppie. Find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. Check out How to Write Good on Facebook if you'd like, share, stuff like that. How to Write Good is brought to you by Public House Media. We're going to jump right into our accidental essence this week. And the reason why we're going to, and by we I mean me, why I'm going to, I have a hard time with that. I don't know why I do that. I don't necessarily like talking in the first person plural. I do it a lot though. And I correct myself. So we're going to jump into our discussion about fandoms and obsession right away because I'm not sure I can get through it in the time that I have without jumping into it right away. So if you haven't listened to last week's podcast, you should. So you should listen to, I think I called it Obsession Part 1. This is Obsession Part 2. We left off talking about why obsessions or fandoms. So I was talking about things like Listomania and Beatles and how in the past people didn't seem to have such a mass hysteria that they do today about art and media and different things like that. And now we're going to jump into the rest of it. So why do these fandoms form is what we're going to look at. And we're going to be looking at these fandoms in comparison to other areas of obsession people may have, such as a career. So we already talked about, so how we're gonna look at how fandoms form first, or how I think fandoms form, because it may not actually be the case, but this is food for thought for you, and I think it's probably the case that you need to do a lot of studying to see exactly how this happens. But I think that this at least will get us started with a hypothesis about how they might form in the real world. So I talked about how culture allows it, and I talked about survival, or the fact that we don't just survive anymore, that we actually have so much food and we have so much. If you got to think about history, you got to, like, people don't realize that we have it so good. We have it so unbelievably good in the world today, in most cases. I mean, I know there's awful situations people are in the world, but if you're listening to this podcast, you have access to the computer and an internet, okay? And it's likely that you have a lot of things that people in the past didn't. Just think back 100 years. My grandma, I know that when she was a kid, they had an outhouse, right? And that's, it's about 100 years ago when she was born. She was born in the 1920s, I think. But if you think back 200 years, you don't have any combustion engine, you don't have electricity, you don't have electric lights, you don't have all these different amenities, and people had been living that way for thousands of years before that. So we are really, really... we have such an abundance today that people didn't have, and I think that people just take it for granted. And I would certainly say that I take it for granted as well. Okay, so culture. Now going back to what I was talking about before, because I have to take some side notes. So culture allows, or I think culture today, possibly with this idea, as I said before, of self-fulfillment and chasing after things that possibly make you feel good, not necessarily feel good if it's self-fulfillment, but what about the more minute human element? So culture is a bigger picture thing, and I just want to talk about fandoms and how why an individual would be part of a fandom, or why I think someone would be obsessed with something, okay, if that makes sense. And I'm sure it does make sense. You're not unintelligent people, I think. Of course, I don't know you, but I'm guessing you're fairly intelligent people. Of course, you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to me. I'm just kidding. Okay. So, where does the obsession of media come from? That's the question. And I think this obsession, because that if how I define fandom, if you miss this, if you are being an idiot and you're deciding to listen to this episode before the other episode for whatever godforsaken reason, I don't know what you're doing if you're not listening to that episode first. And I'm not just trying to get people to listen to more episodes, because I don't care about, like, if you want to listen to this episode, if you really want to just listen to this and nothing else, that's okay with me. But you really need to get the other part, because they go together. And I'm not doing it to get more listens, because I actually enjoy this. I'm not just trying to get attention, or maybe I am just trying to get attention. Who knows? So obsession, I think, as I define it, fandoms, because I have to go back to that because I can't actually keep on one track when I'm thinking. I've got like 14 things going on. I define fandoms not just as people who like stuff, but people who interact in a group, and how what they interact with, or how they interact with the people, is related to their what they are fans of. So people in the fandom of Star Wars would interact with those people in that same group about Star Wars, but it also has a element of obsession with that. Okay, so that's how I'm defining it, if you're that one person who didn't listen to the last episode. So I think this obsession, and I think there's an element of obsession in a lot of this, is connected to fascination. So people always have things they're interested in. People always have something they're interested in, whether it's math, and it's always been the case: math, science, astronomy, writing, philosophy, writing. If you look at the pyramids are very math, like, I guess they line up with astronomy. So there was someone who was designing these pyramids and placing them in a specific way that was so obsessed with what they were doing that they wanted to line it up with the stars, right? Or you have people who build amazing architecture. I really like. It's kind of sad. I think that if you live in Europe, so if you're someone from Europe who's listening to this right now, I think that in some cases you don't appreciate the architecture of the Middle Ages. So I guess it's more Renaissance with the cathedrals. I think they're amazing. They're really, really cool. And if you live next to some, it's like me. So my parents live near the Mississippi River. And unless you actually stop and think, wow, that's the third largest river in the world, you take it for granted. Or if you live by a Great Lake, now I live near a Great Lake, you take it for granted that you live by such an amazing body of water. I live in Wisconsin, so we are actually bordered by two Great Lakes. We have these huge bodies of water, fresh water, not salt water. Or if you live by the ocean, you just take these things for granted. So there's people who, and the architecture of Europe is amazing, so you should really check. Like, if you're in Europe, if you live in Europe, just appreciate the cool things around you, appreciate the history. So people have been always fascinated and obsessed with different things. And when people get fascinated by things like mathematics or science, astronomy I guess is a part of science. If people get obsessed with writing, like I'm sort of obsessed with, or philosophy, because I have this podcast called How to Write Good, therefore I must be obsessed with writing, they start to form disciplines. And people also become obsessed with art, and that is what we're talking about today. So now, where does this fascination come from? So we've got to go deeper, right? And I think there's two different perspectives, and after I talk about it, you're probably going to figure out what my perspective is, because I'm going to gloss over one fairly quickly. So there's the atheistic and there's a deistic perspective. And I think that all the perspectives you're going to come across are going to come down to these two things. So you're going to either be coming from an atheistic perspective. So it's more scientific, right? It's more, what's the word? Empirical. So it's more based on things you can touch and feel, things you can measure. Okay. And the other one is the deistic reason, which I think is more based on a philosophical aspect of reality. So if someone is talking about the reason why someone might have fascination, they're either going to go from an idea that it just looks at people from a perspective of how they exist in the world like this, or there's going to be people looking at it from a perspective of people are special in some way, or there's something more going on about people rather than they're just chemicals that are just reacting in a brain. Okay. And so the atheistic perspective, fascination, the argument would come down to something like fascination is a developed trait that allows people to survive. okay? Because when you go from the atheistic perspective, at least in our culture, and it could change. You don't think it could change, but it certainly could change. In our culture, we always go back to the evolutionary perspective when it comes to arguments like this. So if you look at a person, you look, why does someone do that? Like, why do people have a drive for eating? Why do people get hungry? Because you getting hungry isn't your stomach getting hungry. There are chemicals in your brain that tell you, oh, you are hungry. So they create a feeling inside of you that is hungry. So they go back to this idea of, oh, well, this is a survival mechanism. And it certainly could be the case that in 100 years, people start rejecting evolution in favor of another paradigm that still allows them to think in a way that it doesn't have to bring the idea of God into it, But as we are now, people would go down to this. People would state that fascination is essentially a survival mechanism. And so the more you're able to, so how this would work is if you are a hunter and if you're a hunter and you're obsessed with hunting, you are going to be able to study everything about hunting and learn about hunting in ways that nobody else learns about hunting. So you're going to be like the best hunter ever. So being the best hunter ever is going to help with your survival. Let's just say you're a hunter, you're a gatherer. And if you are obsessed with that, if you have a fascination with that, I guess I should say fascination for both of these, that is going to allow you to be better at gathering the best things and seeing where it is and maybe even growing stuff, because you see how they grow, you understand more about it. And any argument about fascination that is from an atheistic perspective, at least in the West, I guess, maybe not in other areas of the world, is going to come down to more of an evolutionary perspective. So that is where the evolutionary perspective is. The deist perspective, if you look at it from the fact, from an idea that people are created and there is a mind behind the creation of people, then I would say that there's a creative impulse in humanity, okay? There's a generative impulse. And if you don't know what the word generative means, it's related to the word generate, so you're making something, okay? And within the Judeo-Christian viewpoint, this impulse, this aspect of humanity, they call the image of God, all right? So God, within this paradigm, God creates spectacular things that would reflect God, and the ultimate reality is found in God. So you're drawn toward those things. And humans, because they have, within the Judeo-Christian perspective, because they have this image of God, also have this generative, creative aspect within them that allows to create things that point back to that ultimate reality of God. Because, okay, so if you're an atheist and you're listening to this, I think you would agree with the fact that if there is a God, so let's just say in hypotheticals, if there is a God, that God has, and that God's created everything, and the ultimate reality, the purpose you were made for, goes back to that God. And you don't have to believe that, but you can still have this thought experiment and go through the process of saying, okay, if this God existed, what would be the case with this? Okay. Like if you could ask the God and say, okay, what's my purpose? That God is going to be able to tell you, because that God has a bigger perspective than you're ever going to be able to imagine. So just think of it hypothetically if you're an atheist. And I'm a Christian. I lean more toward this idea of the image of God. And I think that it's a very interesting idea. And I think that is why people are fascinated on the base level. And I think that you could argue that there's other things going on that are related to people interacting in the world and things going on in people's brains chemically. But the ultimate reality, I'd go back to that, of course. And there's other people who would go back to the atheistic perspective. And some of you who, if you don't believe in this, if you think something else, you may think, oh, well, you're just putting up a straw man for the atheistic view. And I hope that I haven't. I hope that I've actually put up an argument that someone who would defend that position would as well. Okay. So when I started this podcast, actually when I started the last episode of this podcast, I was talking specifically about art. Now, I think that we need to look at fascination with a specific field, like a job, a career. And so you could ask, okay, so isn't your field a fandom as well? And I think that there's a difference between fandoms and the field. So when we look at a career, or when we look in a field of study, there's more areas to explore than a fandom in a field of study, okay? So if I'm obsessed with math, I'm never going to get to the bottom of mathematics. If you're Isaac Newton, you can't get to the bottom of mathematics, okay? All right, you are not going to get to the bottom of mathematics. If you're Albert Einstein, you're not going to get to the bottom of mathematics, okay? Isaac Newton was so obsessed with math, he created calculus because he was bored, essentially. I'm simplifying it, but he created calculus, and he still was wrong about stuff, okay? And if I'm obsessed with music, even though, okay, so if you look at music, it's essentially the case, or according to a friend of mine, because I'm not an expert in music, but according to him, so I'm using an argument from authority, how he talks about, I'm not using an argument from authority, I'm talking about his argument and his experience, okay? So he's saying this, if it's wrong, I'm using an eyewitness account of his own experiences, essentially. So when he talks about music, he talks about the fact that in these great composers like Bach and Beethoven essentially dredged the depths of what you could do with the Western tonal system. Okay, they got to the bottom of the Western tonal system. There was such genius in them that they could just be like, here's what we have. This is all that's left in music. But at the same time, within music, you can write an infinite number of songs. All right, but with the consumption of art, when you produce something, when something is produced, that's all you get, okay? So if I write a book and it has a cult following, there's nothing else besides that book, unless I write more books, right? There's stuff maybe in my head, but the people who are actually fans of that, there's nothing else. Now, you get what's produced and you get headcanons, but headcanons aren't really part of the art. When you look at mathematics, you start with 2 + 2, and then you suddenly get to calculus. You suddenly get to stuff like discrete math, statistics, and all these different crazy things within mathematics, and things you can do about it, and things you can explore in the world that are mathematical, okay? And they keep on going on and on and on and on. But there's no more info about, there's no more other info. There's no more other info about a fandom. There's no more other info about the object of the fandom. All right? There's no more. You've got a lot of excitement, but nothing else. All right? And I think that if I really love science, I'm going to be a scientist in some capacity and may be engaged in scientific work. So if you really love science, you may teach science, okay? But I don't consider you a scientist unless you're actually engaging in scientific work, okay? If you teach history, but you don't engage in actual historical work, I don't consider you a historian, if that makes sense. And there are other capacities rather than just doing experiments that you can be a scientist in, such as you could be reading a lot of stuff and you can be making theories and writing papers, and you're essentially doing a meta-analysis, and then you're using your creativity and your creative drive to think about these things and then come up with different ideas. That could be the case, and other people are left to test them, but you're still functioning in some capacity as a scientist. You're creating theories, and people have done this in the past. So I'm going to work in that area if I love the area. If I really like writing, I'm going to do that as well. But I don't know. I hope that you can see like how these obsessions parallel. Both can talk about it for hours. So if you have somebody who's into science and they're obsessed with science, they could probably talk about science for hours. It's the same thing as someone who's really into video games. Both snatch up any info on it. They want to know everything about it, and both are generally experts on their different field. But an obsession with science is likely to generate something, okay? An obsession with a specific art can generate more art, technically, but I mostly see just a lot of excitement in this area. I don't see a lot of people generating tons of art because, okay, so if you're obsessed with science, like you want to go into that field and you want to do scientific work, well, I guess that's not the same. Maybe I'm creating a straw man for the fandoms, because if you're obsessed with video games, you may want to go into the area of video games, and it certainly is the case that there are people who really, really like science who aren't scientists, but they think they're sciencey. It's kind of a fad. It's kind of a fad to be obsessed with things. So, but when you think about people who really like an area, so if you like somebody who really, if you think about a group of scientists. Now, people who, if there's a group of scientists, they typically really, really like science. But then if you look at people who really like a specific form of art, like they are really, what am I trying to say here? They're really obsessed with it. They really like it. They're fascinated with it. We look at those two groups differently, okay? Because I think they act differently. And they act differently. Here's a question. Here's something you can ask yourself. Now, if you were talking about a specific, and I guess not all fandoms act the same. I guess it depends on the fandom. But if you were talking about a specific fandom, you're like, okay, I'm going to talk about, where's my list? I'm going to talk about Harry Potter fans. Now, if you talk about Harry Potter fans, and you're like, I want to talk about Harry Potter fans who are obsessed with Harry Potter. If I say I want to talk about people who are obsessed with science, is there a different picture that comes to your mind? Because there is a different picture that comes to my mind, and maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me thinking this. When I think about Harry Potter fans, I think about people who are like my definition of fandom. Fandom, that's how you say it. My definition of fandom. And if I think of scientists, I think of people doing scientific work. Now, with the people who are obsessed with Harry Potter, I think, oh, they might be a little annoying. And people who are obsessed with science, I think, okay, they're probably just by themselves working on science stuff. And they're not really getting out of their little bubble unless something really big happens, like they make a huge discovery. Whew. All right, so I'm going to take a quick side note to explain why they're different. We're talking about fascination with art. We're talking about fascination with the world in general. I'm getting really tired. I'm sorry about this. I'm kind of wearing out. Truth be told, I recorded both of these back to back because I didn't want my ideas to slip out of my mind. When I write something down, when I write my ideas for my show down, I need to get them out within a couple days. Otherwise, it's difficult. So, I think we're going to go back to it now. I think the pleasure that comes from the fascination with the world, and I think, okay, I'm trying to explain why I think that people within a fandom are different than people within a discipline, say science or mathematics. All right, that's what I'm trying to explain right now, if it didn't make sense to before. So, to start out, I think that the pleasure that comes from a fascination with the world is different than that of media. All right, I'm gonna explain that a little bit. So, or I'm gonna elaborate on that. I'm gonna restate it in a way. So, if you go out into the world, the pleasure you get from interacting with the actual world is different. Now, media is part of that actual world, but the pleasure you get with interacting with that actual world is different than the pleasure you get if you pick up a book, if you play a video game, if you watch a movie, TV show, if you listen to music. I think those two pleasures are different, all right? The reason is media is created to be enjoyed, all right? There's a spike in your endorphins when you read media, and I think that it should be the case. Like, if you read a book and you don't ever think the book is good, if you don't enjoy the book, what's the point of the book? A book of fiction. Now, if it's nonfiction, it's a little different. But if you read a book of fiction and you don't enjoy that book at all, I think that either you may not just like that genre, or if nobody enjoys that book at all, the author has failed, right? If nobody enjoys the book, because the book was created to be enjoyed. Video games are actually, some people think video games are designed with operant conditioning in mind, so that it creates an addictive pattern for certain games. So there's a specific schedule that you can feed a pigeon. So you go back to Skinner. There's a specific schedule you can feed a pigeon according to operant conditioning, and it's the schedule that best conditions that. So it trains that pigeon to do certain things. because of specific stimuli. And operant conditioning, some people think that video games actually do that. They point to specific patterns within video games. Movies and music. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead really quickly. All right. So the pleasure is different between different forms of media. So I would say that video games are probably the highest pleasure, and then you've got movies and music, and then books, and then finally traditional art has the lowest amount of pleasure you can derive from it, but you're still trying to have the pleasure come from it. Okay. But I think that when you engage with media, the media is much shallower. It's not much more shallow. It's much shallower than actual reality, because the pleasure is quicker. The pleasure comes faster. The pleasure goes faster. When you read a book, so here's the thing. Okay, now if I do a lot of studying, if I try to study writing, so if I go into writing and I try to study writing, I eventually, it may be hard work, all right? It may be hard work to initially start studying writing, but eventually I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to be getting pleasure, because either I've started to understand the material. There's, I've talked about him before, but there's I think he's Polish, I can't remember his name, but he talks about the idea of flow. He wrote the book Flow, and he talks about how you get into this pattern of flow. And with media, and I think this should be the case to a certain degree, when you take in media, you get into a pattern of flow a lot quicker, especially with stuff like video games. And I think especially with stuff like music, you get into this pattern of flow where just like the world seems to be moving. I humorously to myself, it's a joke to myself, say it's like getting into a seam in the universe. So I say it's a seam in the universe because if you run water down something and there's a seam, the water's going to follow the seam because it's the path of least resistance. It's the lowest point. And in the same way, if you play a video game, if you listen to music, if you watch a movie, those things are designed so you slip, you forget yourself, you slip into the movie, you slip into the video game, you slip into the book or whatever you're doing, and you forget yourself and you just find pleasure in that thing. But with reality, it takes longer to get into that sense of flow, and it actually takes training to do that. So some people, just another side note, because I love side notes, there are some people, and I thought about this a little bit, but I don't think it's a good thing. There are some people who want to take ideas from games. They think this sense of flow, this idea of flow is good. And I think this idea of flow is good. I want, and I'm talking about teachers right now. There are some teachers. I want students to be able to start working on something and get into a sense of flow where they're just able to think about it on a higher level and do a lot of different, they just see it in a different way. They just experience it in a different way. But some people think, oh, well, we've got video games. We should make school more like video games and mimic video games, have it faster paced so that kids get into this sense of flow. But I don't actually think that's a good thing, because reality doesn't exist in that way. We shouldn't have school in a way that doesn't reflect reality. Reality is actually when you're trying to get into a sense that you're actually good enough to do, you have this expertise and you still have a challenge in your work. When you get to that point, it can be easy when you do tons of work, but there's this idea. So I don't remember, Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote Blink and The Tipping Point. I don't know if he came up with the idea. I don't think he did. But he always talks about this idea of the 10,000 hour rule. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this. And my friend always brings this up, and it's a really good reminder. So there's this 10,000 hour rule that you aren't really an expert until you've done 10,000 hours worth of a thing. And that's the type of flow I think people should get into, because they're an expert at their field and they can slip into this flow, this workflow that's just like everything just seems to be clicking into place for them. They're able to think really quickly, but they've done 10,000 hours of work and struggled to get to that point. Okay? There are aspects of reality that give a type of pleasure that is instant, like video games, like media, like books. Well, books aren't necessarily instant, but there are aspects of reality that give a type of pleasure that is similar to this. You have marijuana, you have like people take drugs. There's drugs and there's food. I think food is similar to this, especially if you're really hungry. But I think that flow, that sense of accomplishment in what you're doing really comes with requires a degree of patience. So you've got these really difficult games, and I think difficult video games are really good for people. I think that most video games should be pretty stinking hard. I don't think there should be easy video games. I think they should take a level of skill to actually win. There's these games like Dark Souls, and there's these games like the newest one that people are freaking out about, or fairly new, not new anymore, I guess, Cuphead, where people can't beat it. But that's how they used to be. And I think it's good for people because it's more similar to the real world, and it's the real world turned into the game, rather than what teachers want to do is turn the real world into a game. All right, going back to media. When you do something in the real world, you have a sense of accomplishment. But in a lot of cases with media, now not so much with video games because you actually have to do something for that, so I'm going to give them props for that. But with other things, so if you watch a movie, or if you are a sports fan and there is accomplishment, there's a team accomplishing something, you have excitement that you haven't earned. If you watch a movie, there are emotions, there should be emotions within you, but you haven't experienced that same thing emotionally, all right? Man, this is just going really long. I'm already over 30 minutes, and I just cannot believe this because it's going so fast. So I'm going to say a few more things. I'm going to try to come to a good closure about this. And so this happens in a lot of areas. Now, one thing that concerns me, and because I've been talking about this a little bit, one thing that concerns me is that people this obsession is starting to cross over into other areas of life. The obsession that is akin to fandom obsession, what I've been talking about, is crossing over into different areas. So someone in the past may have been like, oh yeah, I really enjoy my job doing X, or I really enjoy my job teaching. And now someone is saying, I effing love my job teaching, and it is the best thing in the world, and it's my calling, and it's everything I do, and it's my whole life revolves around this. And I don't think that's a good thing. Okay, I think you should try to get into a job that you enjoy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think that there's this idea that you're obsessed with your field. And I guess that I'm kind of a hypocrite in this area, because for me, I want to write. I really like writing. I love to do it. I guess it's not my whole world. If there was something in my life, if writing, if there was some effect that writing had on my life that was negative, so in a big major way, there are certainly cases in my life where I'm like, man, writing like gets me really frustrated, but that's not big enough. It'd have to be really big. It'd have to be something that affects probably my relationship with my wife, or in the future my relationship with my kids. If there was something that did that with writing, my writing isn't as important as those people in my life. Okay, and when you are obsessed with a specific field, that becomes, I was talking about it at the beginning of the last podcast, or in the middle of the last podcast, when people are obsessed with a specific type of specific media type, it incorporates into they incorporate it into their personality, and that's what happens when you're obsessed with your field, that you cannot let it go no matter what. And maybe I am, I don't know. And I think this is part of a cultural shift as well. I don't think a lot of people grow up as much these days. I think that to grow up, you need to experience a lot of pain, and I've talked about pain in the past. I think you need to experience a lot of pain in your life to really grow up, and I just don't think it's happening as much, or people are growing up differently. So you never grow up. If you never grow up, obsession is acceptable. Now, I can really handle obsession in kids, but obsession in adults, I think it's just something, I don't know, it bugs me. And I'm going to leave it at that, because I am up to 33 minutes, and that's the end of this show. I guess that I'm going to be doing one more episode of Obsession. So my name is Daniel Poppie. I've got a headache, and this is How to Write Good. So see you later. Have fun with your week. Bye.